So many years ago, I think it was actually shortly before AWS was first announced, at least the infrastructure part of what you do, Deborah Trapati, who was the VP of Operations at Microsoft, made a comment to me which resonated, which she said, in the future, being a developer on someone's platform will mean being hosted on their infrastructure. And at the time, that seemed like, whoa, that's a really out there kind of comment. Now, of course, it's something we all take for granted, because, with the exception of local apps, everything has a cloud component. But it isn't quite clear. We still have a lot of our thinking is rooted in the old model of, the operating system is what runs on a local device. I've been arguing in the last decade that we're really building an internet operating system, and you guys are all building pieces of it. And what I would really love to explore in this panel is how is that shaking out? In some sense, you guys are at different levels and you'll have different perspectives, but perhaps we can start to understand, what does this global, operating system infrastructure look like? So, and also, I guess, who's going to control it? And so I want to start with that control question. We are seeing increasingly people vying for lock-in. There's other people saying, hey, this needs to be open. How do we open it? So how are you guys thinking about lock-in versus portability in the cloud era? Any of you want to?
Sure. I can go first here. I think that point of view that if you're a developer for someone's platform, then you have to be hosted on their infrastructure is sort of indicative of the early phase of the industry. That's analogous to how things were in the mainframe world circa 1960.
Yeah.
That if you wrote for IBM's software, you had to be on IBM's hardware. And then as the industry matured, basically there became clearer lines of stratification and of architecture that allowed decoupling of certain of these points of control.
Right.
And I think the cloud's going to be no different. I think at the infrastructure level, the low infrastructure level, cloud-based infrastructure is going to become the new hardware. It's something you just take for granted, you expect it to run, etc. And the question then becomes, is there going to be a layer or layers of software that allow you to develop applications that don't tie you to the new hardware, that allow you portability across hardware, to stretch that analogy. And I think you see that already emerging in the industry, and that today if you write a Ruby on Rails application, for instance, you're not tied to anyone's particular infrastructure to deploy it. You have
but we do have at least on for that class of app, we do have an 800-pound gorilla in the space sitting to your right.
I think it's very different to say that there's a common place where everyone goes and being tied a priori to that space. And I think that as, in particular, open and open source-based frameworks mature, they are going to offer developers a degree of choice over whose infrastructure they bind to. Now, I'm sure infrastructure vendors, just like hardware vendors did over the years, will try and find particular features to try and attract you to stay on their infrastructure. But I think it's important that as an industry, we make it possible for developers with less effort rather than more effort.
So Andy, how do you think about that in Amazon?
I'll tell you the way we think about it, which is, really from the very start when we started Amazon Web Services, we heard loud and clear from developers that they did not want to be locked in, and they viewed this new horizon as an opportunity to kind of rewrite some of the rules. And so that's one of the reasons we've built our infrastructure services the way we have, which is very much on open components like Linux and MySQL and a bunch of things like that. And it's trivially easy to move away from our services if customers aren't happy. It's just an API call. And so, and it's very much by design. We don't want to lock customers in. We want to go earn that business every day, every week, every month. And the way we think we earn that business over time, over the long term, is not only having stellar operating performance, but adding a lot of features and services that customers tell you are important to open up more and more of their workloads to run on the platform. But also,
as you do that, don't you start building in sort of custom features that make it harder for people to move away, or do you feel like you can continue to go up the stack?
I think developers have a lot of choice. If you look at our storage services or our compute services, again, it's trivially easy to get started or to move away from it. And I don't think that the developers who use our platform today feel locked in. I think, as I said, I think they'll stay based on the operational performance. And I think the other thing that really matters is the value proposition. At the end of the day, they're building applications that run an infrastructure. And I think they want to work with companies who work relentlessly to take cost out of their own cost structure and then pass it back in the form of lower prices. And if you look, we've lowered our prices a dozen times in 4 years, largely in the absence of competitive pressure to do so, because it's just the way we think about all of our businesses at Amazon, that we relentlessly work on taking out costs to pass it back to customers in the form of lower prices.
Good defensive move, right? Obviously, if you do it before a competitor does, you remain the good guy.
It's not the intention. I think, again, you can look at all of our businesses at Amazon. I think we have traditionally been very focused on continuing to lower prices for customers.
Yeah. So, Mark, when somebody develops a Salesforce app, they really are developing, though, for integration with, a much higher level of software. I mean, people aren't, saying, oh yeah, we're going to take our Salesforce app and take it somewhere else. So you kind of have an implied lock-in. But what's the nature of that?
Well, I think it's really different based on each and every application, each and every developer, and each and every customer. They all have different needs, and they're going to have different goals based on the application. All software is not the same, as you know. I think a great example is I was at dinner last night, and we had this meeting that Bill Gurley was hosting, and we had all these developers around the table, and part of the discussion is, well, if you're going to build for the iPhone or the iPad, or are you building in HTML5, or are you going to build natively? What's the long-term view? What direction are we going? Are you going to build natively on Android and use the Android toolbox and features and functions, or are you going to go, with a more generic approach? And the reality is that that's kind of the same question you're asking these guys, which is, let's say you're building a corporate app. Are you building it in Java? Are you building it in Ruby? Are you going to build it in, we have our own user interface called force.com. What database are you going to be using? These are all choices that don't necessarily have the right answer. In fact, some of the developers at the table had an argument. Some of them are going with Python. Some of them are going with Ruby. Some of them are going in a completely different direction with a new Java virtual machine. Some of them are using JRuby. And, that's what's great about our industry, is that you have choice. And developers are not locked in. I started as an assembly language programmer. That was a lot of heavy lifting. There wasn't, a lot of tools at that time. I wrote 6502, assembly language code. And that was great for that platform when I was writing games on, Atari and Apple II, computers and this type of thing. Today, you have more choices. You have more capabilities based on what you want to do as a developer. And the power of the cloud is you not only have choices in what you're going to write in, you have choices in where you're going to execute it. So are you going to execute it like you can write a Java app, and Paul and I are building something called VMware, which is a combination between our two companies, which is basically the ability to run Java as a service. But if you want to take that Java app and then run it inside your company, you can do that too. And you can use his Spring IDE as kind of the platform agnostic way to drag and drop that back and forth. That, I think, is really the direction that we have to think of, is different apps are going to need different things.
So what do you make, though, of, I guess first of all, you have the traditional hardware vendors who are saying, well, now we're going to offer you the ability to have a private cloud, which is really, we're just going to sell you what we sold you before.
Right,
but,
right. I view cloud computing as something that's, not a private cloud. Cloud computing to me is, first of all, something that's democratic, that small, medium, and large companies can all use, that it's efficient. We have about 90,000 customers, approximately, and those customers, they do about 500 million transactions with us. You can watch that on the web at trust.salesforce.com. We do 4 to 5 nines of reliability. We run our entire infrastructure for all of those customers, on about 1,500 PCs. That is cloud computing, shared infrastructure, efficiency. We do 0.02 grams of carbon per transaction. We measured it. You can compare that to Oracle at 1.3 grams. It's kind of a crazy comparison, but the reality is that it's about efficiency, and it's about lowering cost, and it's about ease of use. And to me, that's what cloud computing is. And that when you look at how are you impacting the environment, how low cost is it? Is it democratic? You know, a few blocks away from here, a couple months ago, was the Oracle conference. Larry got on stage, and there was a huge computer, 3 times the size of this podium. He said, "This is my cloud. You can buy one. They start at $1 million." I was on Twitter. I was watching the conference. It was at 7:30 at night on a Sunday. First of all, I was like, who does their keynote at 7:30 at night on a Sunday? Then the second thing is, I'm like, I got on Twitter and I go, beware of the false cloud. Because everybody's cloud now. There is no differentiation. And then Werner Vogels, who works for Andy, got on there and he goes, if it's about more hardware, it's not about the cloud. Because isn't that the whole point?
Yeah.
It's not about more hardware. It's not about more software. It's about democratization. It's about efficiency. It's about environmental friendliness. And I'm all for virtualization. I mean, I think it's one of the most important new technologies that we have. But what cloud computing is to me is kind of this sacred thing of being able to run things as a service.
This is getting serious. It's actually more suited for Sunday, Mark.
Let me jump in there, and I think this is an issue where I agree with Mark. Cloud is such a broad term and gets painted over everything today that you really run into problems of meaning here.
So go on.
At one point I wanted to make, which is that as important, using the word cloud to describe where the computing takes place, I think it's as important to use the word cloud to describe how the computing is done. And the very techniques that Mark has used to be able to run all of Salesforce.com on 1,500 servers, etc., those techniques can also be applied inside the enterprise.
Yeah.
And there are new architectures and new ways of doing things that are being incubated in the public cloud that I think are going to be very disruptive to the traditional way of doing things in the enterprise, but need to come back into the enterprise as well. So there's a way of thinking about cloud in terms of where the computing gets done. There's a way of thinking about cloud in terms of how the computing gets done.
Does this
that
ultimately
applies to
shrink the
enterprise.
hardware market?
Well,
Or does it grow it because we have
there's
new apps?
2 ways you can argue that.
Yeah.
Techniques like virtualization and cloud are all about driving your hardware to higher levels of efficiency. So in that sense, we're going to be able to get more done with less infrastructure. Now, the democratization, the efficiency that you can get might still in turn drive higher demand. So what the absolute level of infrastructure is debatable, but what is incontrovertible is that infrastructure is being driven to fundamentally higher levels of efficiency.
I happen to think, by the way, it's going to lead to, over the long term, more hardware. If you look at the amount of startups that are able to get started now without having to lay out all that capital up front, if you look at the amount of innovation now in enterprises
the amount
that's
of
getting
hardware
unlocked.
in the used market.
What's
We
that?
think back to 10 years ago after the dot-com bust. Hardware was so cheap because everything was.
But it's not just about hardware.
Yeah.
That's the point. What he said is right. How the startups that can just get started, they can just build something on his service, on my service, on other services. This is what I mean sacred. This is the power of democratization. This is about what has not been possible before in our industry. We make hardware and software too expensive, and we put it up on this kind of, shelf and say, if you're rich and you're elite and you're trained and you've got teams, now you can partake.
Yeah.
But if you don't, then you cannot partake.
I also think one of the
that's
things
over.
I'd point out is that it's not just, I agree with what Mark's saying, it's not just about the expense, though, it's about the ease of provisioning. I mean, you look at enterprises and how long it typically takes them to get a server to do something, 6 to 25 weeks, it's maddening, and it stifles innovation. And if you look at how much new development is happening at enterprises now because it takes minutes to provision instances in the cloud, it's
not
very
about
mind-blowing.
and upgrades and updates and new infrastructure and new all the things, new security models. And when there's a security problem, Andy can fix it right away. Everybody benefits. That's multi-tenancy. That's shared.
So here's one of the questions that I have. Clearly, when you guys started, there were lightweight applications that people couldn't get to before. One of the ones that we were talking about backstage, for example, is the New York Times Historical Archive, which Derek Gottfried did originally. He put it on his literally on his expense account. He put it on his credit card and kind of grew up from there because he did it over a weekend. But now we're moving it into bigger and bigger areas. And what do you see as the curve? First of all, what are some of the more innovative things that you're seeing that have become possible because of this kind of infrastructure? Who's doing some of the most interesting stuff that you're seeing out there, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I think that right now I just want to say I have never been busier, I've never worked harder, and I've not ever seen more innovation in our industry. It is unbelievable what is happening, and it is because of these new models.
Well, I'd love to get specific. I know, like backstage.
I'll give you an example.
Oh,
So one of the really great apps that I see that I'm most excited about is, and I see there's a lot of them within about a half a mile of this building, but you look at something like Dropbox.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a relatively complex problem that a lot of us have worked on, solved by a really smart 25-year-old kid who graduated from MIT, Drew Houston, who has fundamentally changed our industry forever. Because he really gives you the ability to sync. Now, he's one of the top 10 apps on Amazon Web Services. He didn't need a lot of money to start. He's got $30 million in revenue. He's never going to take money again. He's rolling, and it's powerful of the cloud. That's the power of the cloud. The ability to get start, the ability to go everywhere. He's on your iPad, on your iPhone, on your BlackBerry, on your Windows, on your Mac, on and on and on. And I can give you a lot of examples of new companies that have started in the last year or two that are just rolling like that, and it's phenomenal.
So Andy, backstage, you were talking about some of the things that Netflix is doing.
Yeah, I think you see a whole range of disruptive and innovative things happening. So they range from, the Zyngas of the world and the Playfishes of the world that build brand new businesses from scratch, gaming businesses, all in on top of AWS, to enterprises like Netflix, which is running its recommendation system on top of AWS, its movie title queue, all its video transcoding, and they're doing more and more of that is run on top of AWS, to NASA doing all of the Mars rover telemetry analysis, which needs to be close to real time on top of AWS, to things in the high-performance computing space. If you look at offerings like our cluster compute instances and our cluster GPU instances, which we just launched a few days ago, you're seeing hedge funds pop up, that wouldn't before have been able to afford doing the analysis they're doing. You're seeing all kinds of new HPC.
Sure, the democratization of hedge funds is a good thing.
You'll see all kinds of HPC analyses of companies that before just didn't get done because they had these small clusters and they were overused and you could never get access to them. So you're just seeing more and more new development that's enabled by the model of the cloud.
So you guys just added your GPU instances. Are you seeing a lot more scientific use?
We are. We've been seeing quite a bit of life sciences and pharma and financial analysis. It had always been the case in EC2, but when we launched the cluster compute instances, we saw a very large uptick of that. And we had more and more companies that were saying, I love the cluster compute instances. I wish I also had the massive parallelization that GPUs would give me. And we're seeing more of the video rendering applications coming in now that we've launched the GPU instances. And so, we've only had it open for a few days, but the initial response has been terrific.
Yeah, so just in general, do you guys see new classes of apps that are going to become either possible or they existed but they were really, really expensive? Things that we, just go, oh my gosh, now. Again, Microsoft was very excited, for example, when they made the deal with Pixar to put RenderMan on Azure. The idea that, the technology that built Toy Story is now more available.
I think it's what Mark was saying, which is it's not so much that there's fundamentally new classes of apps yet. We might see those new classes of apps emerging at a higher level in the cloud when you can tap into, geolocation services, other kind of services that might become possible. But right now, it's about the democratization. It's about the fact that people who could not have afforded the capital equipment before now no longer have to have that as a barrier. The other thing that I think is interesting about what's happening is that the cloud is enabling, and it's going to continue to enable, a degree of device independence that we haven't seen before. And our lives are going to be much more centered around information held in the cloud and much less around dependence on a particular device.
So that sort of brings kind of into focus an interesting discussion. If you look at Google versus Apple, Apple is still, has a lot of ties to their specific devices. Google, despite Android, is really, making a broad play to say we're really available on any device. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think it's
would you question Apple's strategy?
I think it's an interesting battle that's unfolding in front of us. To your point about the title of this session, points of control. I do think, in the long run, we as
don't bet against Steve.
we as individuals are going to want to have a much closer relationship with whoever is the custodian of our information, and we're going to expect whatever device we use at that point in the day to be able to cleave to that information, not the other way around. So in that sense, I would bet on the other side of the equation, although it's an interesting speculation as to who is going to end up the custodian of our information. Is it Google? Is it Facebook? Is it the banks? Is it someone else? I don't know.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of fighting over that. But speaking of fighting, the opposite of fighting is partnering. And can you kind of talk about the different layers of partnering that happen in the cloud ecosystem? Like clearly VMware, Salesforce working together, VMware, Google working together, Amazon, you're working in some level with everybody. But I don't know that people outside the industry understand what the ecosystem looks like. There's all these third-party companies who are part of, for example, the AWS ecosystem. Can you guys unpack that a little bit? Like, who else is winning besides, you guys, because of what you're doing?
I think, the cloud opens up this enormous array of opportunities, and I think if you look at the ecosystem being built around AWS as well as other parts of the cloud, it's moving fast and furious. I would kind of characterize two different classes of main ecosystem players. One are systems integrators who help companies move really quickly and get going on the cloud. And for us, we partner with companies like Deloitte and Capgemini and Accenture, larger ones, as well as a lot of the fastest moving mid-sized players like RightScale and Digitaria and Freedom OSS and Razorfish. But there's also this really large group of ISVs that range from large players. Oracle certified its entire stack on top of AWS, and we have partnerships with SAP and with Red Hat and Novell and Pegasystems and Sage and Lawson, a whole bunch of those, to brand new applications that are being built from scratch on top of the cloud that leverage the cloud infrastructure from the get-go.
So let me ask maybe an inverse question. Who should be in the cloud business, who isn't? I think about there's the telcos, there's the big companies like IBM, Oracle. I mean, what should they be doing about this trend? And are they going to be rendered irrelevant, or are they going to find a place in the ecosystem?
Well, we're running we have a big program coming up December 6th, 7th, and 8th here in San Francisco, a couple blocks away at Moscone Center. On December 6th, the first day, we have a developer conference called Cloud Stock. That is going to be basically everybody, including the three of us, coming together to talk about how to build these next generation cloud solutions. It's already sold out with 3,000 attendees. It got sold out in the first week. And then after that, on December 7th and 8th, we have our Dreamforce conference. We will have 25,000 attendees. There's already approximately 20,000 people registered. It'll be the largest cloud computing conference ever in the history of our industry. And I told you backstage, but anybody who attends Web 2.0 can attend Dreamforce for free. You just need to send us proof of registration.
Well, that's quite an offer.
And you can if you just send it to T Wong, T-W-O-N-G, Tom Wong, at salesforce.com with your Web 2.0 reg, he will comp you the $1,000 off for Dreamforce, and you can attend the conference. And I think what you'll see, because we have a trade show as part of that, which is sold out, hundreds of vendors who have rebuilt their enterprise apps totally targeted as a service. I have really never seen the volume of activity, of innovation and change And I think what this conference will show is that this has become
right.
mainstream.
But still, question was really, who's not at the table who ought to be?
I think everybody is coming to the table, but there are some people who are outliers. You saw, like I mentioned with Oracle, you know, the cloud is not a box, but they say that it is. I think that you still see some players, even IBM is trying to come up with some services, but you know, they're still selling 5,000 mainframes a year. So I don't know. I think that you've seen that the shift is happening. And as Frank said before, everybody is trying to get there. They realize that this is what customers want, not just startups and next-gen companies,
I just
but
think back to the
enterprises too.
PC, you know, when you had people like Ken Olsen of Digital Equipment Corporation saying the PC is a toy, and of course, that was a colossal miscalculation. I'm wondering who's making that kind of misjudgment.
The role of
today
Ken
about
Olsen
cloud.
is being played by Larry Ellison.
Yeah. All right. So that's a good quotable line. If we have any questions from the audience, please come up. We've got a few minutes left. And if not, I'm going to keep going. Do we have anybody out here? How is the sort of the cloud stack evolving? You know, you guys are each adding new features. You're developing new ways for developers to interact. Any directions you can give us on how people should be thinking about what they can expect as this becomes more powerful next year than it is today?
I think there are certainly certain layers of technology that are going to be even more important going forward. I think the new programming models, as evidenced by the modern third-generation frameworks, whether those be Ruby or Spring or Node.js or...
But notice you're not talking about things like Hadoop, and you're not talking about...
No, I actually was going to get to that as my next comment. So they are going to become more important because I think they will form the on-ramp for many developers into the cloud. I think the second important thing is that when you build cloud-scale applications, depending on the type of the application, again, you really can't use the centralized database model to scale. That scale applications force you to rethink how you structure your data layers. So there's tremendous interest in ferment, and there's interesting feedback loop between these open frameworks and these new data models that's occurring.
Yeah, as you mentioned data, I mean, it really does seem to me that, you know, that is one of the aspects of cloud that we haven't fully digested, because of course there's the cloud infrastructure level, but there's a set of apps that you can only build if you have access to very large data sets, some of which may not be yours. Now, you know, think about any application that wants to use mapping. You know, there's only a certain number of players who have all that data. I think that's part of what you're doing at Salesforce. You have access to certain classes of data that people can then use to leverage in their apps.
That's what you said to me like 3 years ago is true. And you haven't really talked that much about it, actually. The data itself is a platform.
Yeah.
That there's fundamentally three things that we have to be focused on: the apps, the platform themselves, and the data.
Yeah.
And that's why we bought Jigsaw, because we see data as becoming a platform. And I believe in your vision there. I think that you are dead on, way ahead. You're working with all those data companies that are your customers, trying to redevelop themselves, because cloud data is really powerful when you put those two things together. And I think for us, the three of us, we have to continue to iterate in these three categories. It's not just about the apps, you know, and the sales and service, and it's not just about the platform and the tools, but it's also, you know, about the data. And if you can get those three things working together, it's very powerful. And that's what we're trying to do in our company.
I think the key point there again is we don't want to see a world come where any one of these things become the ultimate control point that controls a bunch of things that they don't need to control. In other words, if you're using somebody's data platform, does that mean that you have to use their programming model, their infrastructure, their everything else? The reality is modern technology allows you to disaggregate these pieces, potentially with different business models associated with them, but I think that's the way things are going to go.
I just want to say I don't believe in the points of control metaphor for this time of our industry. I don't believe that any industry has changed as much as ours, and that the points of control are illusions, and that over time they may appear and disappear, but they're really just kind of, transient, and that we shouldn't be that worried about it. I think it's post-traumatic stress disorder around Microsoft, kind of how they controlled things. But as we move from the Microsoft era and into the Google era, now into the Facebook era, and then on to the next era, that it's those points of control shift.
We're out of time, but we said we would actually allow a question, so why don't we take this question and then we're going to go.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the democracy in the cloud system because, yes, people need that. Everybody deserves a chance to be an innovator, so thank you guys for that. My question is, with that, when I'm talking to, the common company, something like that, everybody always has problems with their servers and stuff like that. How do you sell that product to the common person, like in what you said, which was the custodians of the information? Like Facebook said, okay, we're going to come out with the email system and da-da-da-da. When you read CNN and Huffington Post, people's comments are, I don't want to give Facebook that sort of control over my stuff. How do you guys suggest, in common words to the common man, to convince somebody to give that custodian of their site?
Well, at least for our platform, customers can come and sign up. They don't need to talk to anybody. They can start using the services. All they need is a credit card. And when they place data in our data storage services, they have assurances. We've designed our storage service for 11 nines of durability, so the data doesn't go away quickly, and it doesn't move unless customers decide they want it to move. They get to pick where it is, and it doesn't move. And then if they decide for whatever reason, either for storage or compute, that they don't want to use those services anymore, they want to use somebody else or do it themselves, they just stop using it. They don't have to sign up for any commitment. They pay by the hour, and it's they're free to come and go as they please.
Trust. Trust is the word that you're looking for. And when you can build trust through transparency, that's why we have a website called trust.salesforce.com that shows you everything that's going on in our systems. And we try to open and show as much of our company as we can, because if we don't have transparency with our customers and developers, you won't get the trust. And I have a book called Behind the Cloud where I go through some of those tenets, that the only reason that we are successful in selling to the largest enterprises in the world these services is because our brand is a brand of trust, and it has to be maintained.
All right, ever the salesman, Mark.
I'm trying. I'm doing my best.
Hey, thank you very much. I think we're out of time. Appreciate it. Thank you.